Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Neil Oliver. You can join me live every Saturday evening for opinions and discussions about the week's top stories. There's also a smattering of history and archaeology and features that define our great British Isles. You'll hear my thoughts unfiltered, as well as those of my guests, and we don't always agree. And we want to hear from you too. Neil Oliver Live, Saturdays from 7 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hi there, and a very warm welcome to you this afternoon. It's a new week, a new year, and a new show. Brazier brings you 2 hours of fast-paced news, weekdays 4 until 6. Coming up this hour, why have some hospitals banned the partners of expectant mothers from pregnancy scans? The man who was Theresa May's right-hand man joins me to talk Tony Blair, correction, Sir Tony Blair. And we'll be live in Windsor with the latest twist on the Prince Andrew story. Our Twitter question this afternoon, is it time for Prince Andrew to surrender his HRH title and his military associations? The results and your thoughts later this hour. But first, the news with Polly.
Very good afternoon, your GB News at 4 o'clock. Boris Johnson is warning the NHS faces considerable pressure over the coming weeks due to increasing COVID cases. The Prime Minister says that although Omicron is milder than other variants, it continues to surge throughout the country. He's ruling out a reduction in the self-isolation period to 5 days, claiming the risk of an infectious person returning to work is too high. On a visit to a vaccination hub in Buckinghamshire, he urged everyone who's not yet had their booster to get one.
Just want to make a crucial point to people who are thinking about getting their booster. There are still quite a lot of people who have had 2 jabs but haven't had the third. A third jab really does make a big difference. There are 2 million slots just this week to get your booster, so get boosted now. It can make all the difference in the world. The majority of people who are in ICU, sadly, have not been vaccinated, and certainly the vast majority, about 90%, have not been boosted.
Boris Johnson. Well, secondary school students in England are being told to take COVID tests before starting the new term in a week's time. Face masks will be mandatory for at least the next 3 weeks, and classes may be merged if too many teachers are off sick. The new rules are being introduced by the Education Secretary to try to curb the spread of the Omicron variant. Nadim Zahawi says schools must do everything they can to protect face-to-face learning.
I want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer. I don't want children to be wearing masks. In fact, I've also asked my team in the department to look at doing a piece of research for the longer term as to the impact of wearing masks in classroom would have on students and on their ability to learn.
Well, away from COVID, a legal document which Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex abuse case against him is expected to be made public. The Duke of York's legal team says the proceedings should be thrown out because of a 2009 settlement between Virginia Giuffre and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She alleges Prince Andrew sexually assaulted her when she was 17. He denies any wrongdoing. Royal commentator Jenny Bond says Prince Andrew's friendships were questionable.
Doubt that his judgment, if nothing else, has been called into question by the fact that he has had friendships not with just one sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, but now we know two, a very long-standing friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell, which goes back to university days.
Tributes have been paid to a 14-year-old girl who died after being hit by a car in the West Midlands on New Year's Eve. Olivia Kolak's family described her as the brightest star in their lives. A 39-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of causing death by driving while under the influence of drugs. He's been released under investigation pending further inquiries. Ministers are being urged to bring in a new law that would guarantee all workers 2 weeks of paid leave after a bereavement. The SNP's Patricia Gibson is bringing forward a private member's bill to Westminster. She says it would give people time to grieve without worrying about financial pressures. 2 people are missing following wildfires in the United States. Flames in Colorado spread over an area of 9 square miles, destroying nearly 1,000 homes and buildings. Police are yet to establish a cause. Investigators say they haven't ruled out arson. An internet regulator has found a 6-fold increase in visits to websites that promote violence towards women in the UK last year. Incel websites or involuntary celibate forums promote hatred towards women. The Centre for Countering Digital Hate says there were more than 638,000 hits every month on 3 of the largest sites. That's up from over 114,000 the year before. You're up to date. I'll have more for you in half an hour, but now it's back to Brazier.
Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier. I'm going to be talking to a GP about the cancer diagnosis backlog as we get the latest COVID figures this hour. Not this hour, but on this day, 34 years ago, to the day as it happens, Margaret Thatcher became the longest-serving PM of the 20th century. One of her loyal lieutenants, Peter Lilly, joined me to explain why you just saw those pictures, why the Iron Lady would have no time for green taxis. And what should the royal family do with a problem like Prince Andrew? 2/3 of Britons think he can't now have a royal role. But how easy is it, really, in a world of smartphones to disappear from public life? Well, let's start. As any parent will testify, going for a scan when expecting a baby can be quite an experience. For most, it's a joyous moment, the first sight of what a much-wanted pregnancy looks like via a grainy ultrasound image. Of course, for others, it can be a tense time and worse. Scans sometimes reveal unexpected fetal abnormalities. But whatever the reaction, joy or despair, everyone agrees that it's a significant moment for a couple, and one that, as well as obviously requiring the presence of the mother, also benefits from the involvement of her partner. However, according to reports, several health trusts in England have imposed a bedside ban on partners because of the threat posed by Omicron. That's prompted several MPs to demand that NHS England restores the right, if that's what it is, of partners to be there when scans happen. Joining me is now Alicia Kearns, Conservative MP for Rutland. Thanks so much for your time. Do appreciate it. I used the word right in my introduction there to describe the presence of a partner for a scan. Is it really a right?
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. So first of all, there is the fundamental right to family life, under which you could argue this is protected. But actually, it's more than a right. This is a safety issue. So they have proven that when partners were taken away from women in labour during the pandemic, we saw an increase in trauma. We saw an increase in stillbirths. We saw an increase in the deaths of mothers, which was contributed to by the lack of partners. When I gave birth to my first child, it is only because my husband saw that my son's heart rate had halved and pushed the emergency button that my son is alive today. So this isn't just a rights issue, it's also a safety issue.
Talking here, however, about being there at the bedside in the maternity unit at the point of birth, or are we, as I think we are talking about, at the more diagnostic stage when the scan's being done, where you've got the mother, the expectant mother, you've got the clinician doing the scanning, and you've got the partner looking on, unlikely to offer anything of great value.
So we've got actually every single stage currently being threatened by these arbitrary and uncritical and unscientific restrictions. So we had Sandwell and West Birmingham NHS Trust who announced on one day that partners couldn't come for scans, all stages of labour until the woman was in active labour, or for appointments. But then when I kicked up a fuss, all of a sudden the next day, partners could come to all of those, but couldn't come to inpatient wards. So that, I think, shows you that we really are looking at a pandemic of arbitrary discrimination when a trust can change their policy from one day to the next. At the Princess Alexandra Trust in Harlow, we saw them saying that partners couldn't come to the fetal assessment unit. Now, you only go to a fetal assessment unit when your baby, they think you've miscarried or you're bleeding heavily or something is very seriously wrong. And I think it's really important that we don't glamorise pregnancy and birth, because in the movies, it's this really swift, magical, crazy, everyone screams and everything's okay again. But actually, there are so many people, myself included, who go for scans who find out that there's something wrong with the baby or the worst possible thing has happened. And partners matter. And also, parents deserve to be there. We talk about the importance of family. We talk about the fact that we don't want family breakdown and that partners play equal roles in parenting. That starts from the moment the baby is created, not just once the baby is born.
However, trusts aren't doing this by to be antisocial. There's a rationale behind it, and that is that they want to reduce the footfall into their hospitals. We've got an NHS trust, for instance, in Lincolnshire, with a critical incident such as their level of staff shortages there. You can understand that, yes, it's pretty arbitrary, but they are trying to reduce the numbers of people who are coming into hospital for whom acute care is not necessary, and that would certainly apply in this instance, at least where we're talking about scans, just to make sure you're not having people coming into the hospital setting who may be bearing Omicron.
So there are two things I'd say there, which is in the first ever lockdown, there was one hospital in London who never at any point stopped partners coming in and yet didn't have a single case of COVID in the entirety of that lockdown. And secondly, families, parents, they're one bubble, they're one household, and they should be treated as such. We have the vaccine. The vast majority of NHS staff, and all by March, will have been double vaccinated and well as boosted, hopefully. And also we have tests. So there is no reason, particularly for things like scans and I guess what you might call the lesser degree of interventions needed, for people not to be relying on testing rather than just arbitrarily saying, well, that's it. No partners, that's it. So I think the difficulty is, as I've said, if you had NHS England saying we've got to change the guidance, it isn't safe, or if you had the Royal College of Midwives or the Royal College of pretty much any professional clinicians saying that this needs to happen, then perhaps we could look at that. But at the moment, we've got NHS Trust randomly deciding to stop people, again, with no clear evidence, based on the fact that, for example, when I had a go at them on social media, they suddenly changed their minds. And there's no accountability. And that's what I'm saying to NHS England today. We need accountability. You need to monitor. You need to make sure the right mechanisms are in place. You need to make sure that guidance is followed.
On the point about accountability, do you worry? It's felt like there's been a couple of stories, maybe more, in the last few weeks where the democratic oversight that our elected representatives have over unelected officials working within the NHS hasn't always seemed to be what it should be. Is that a fair assessment?
I agree entirely. I should never have had to launch this campaign during the pandemic. I should never have had to have this fight. And the reason I had to have this fight is because we didn't have the powers as parliamentarians to force NHS Trust to uphold NHS England guidance. Why doesn't NHS England have that? Now, one of the new bills that's coming through Parliament, the Health and Social Care Bill, actually gives more power to the Department for Health to be able to tackle things like this. But for example, in Wales, you have people on end-of-life wards allow visitors once a week for 1 hour. How is that humane? And also, how is that scientific? We need to grip this. We cannot have bureaucrats in trust deciding that women should be isolated when we know it makes them less safe. It is unscientific, it goes against the medical evidence, and it makes women less safe, as we have proof of from the last few years.
Since they're not here, just to put their side of the argument, I suspect their side of the argument would be, look, you can't run when you need to make quick decisions, decisive decisions. You can't run these things by committee. Democracy is wonderful. It just happens to take quite a lot of time to organise.
And that's why all I'm asking them to do is uphold NHS England guidance. That's all we're asking for.
OK. Alicia Kearns, MP, really appreciate your time today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, yesterday made it clear that face coverings will be required during school lessons in England's secondary schools until the 26th, at least until the 26th of January, when Plan B measures are due to expire. Earlier, he told GBNews that pupils will only be forced to wear masks in classrooms, quote, whilst Omicron is surging. Here's what he said.
Part of Plan B, you'll recall, we had mask wearing in communal parts in schools. The guidance we've suggested is that just whilst Omicron is surging, that students in secondary schools wear masks in the classroom. It's not ideal. We know that the best place for children is to be in school with their friends, learning in front of a teacher. I want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer.
Well, it seems to be something of a backlash. It's already begun with the former Conservative leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, Dame Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England, and Andrew Bridgen, a Tory MP, who I'll speak to later in the show, all criticising the plan in this morning's newspapers. Well, Nadeem Zahawi also confirming that all secondary pupils in England will be tested before returning this week. Most of them are returning this week, as you'll know if you are a parent of a school-aged child. Joining me now, Senior Lecturer in Education at Goldsmiths, University of London, Dr. Francis Gilbert. Dr. Gilbert, thanks so much for your time today. On the question of masks, it's becoming a divisive issue across the piece, isn't it? But in schools, it does seem that the teaching unions are keen to make the case that children persist in being super spreaders, and teachers are at risk of catching an infection. If they catch COVID, they will have to be absent from the classroom. Ergo, take some measures that stop the transmission easily.
Yeah, I mean, I personally am quite supportive of masks in the classroom at this moment in time, as the Education Secretary is. I think the government advice is sensible advice. We clearly know that the cost to children's mental health if they're not in school is very extreme, which is the other alternative, obviously, that we actually, effectively shut down the schools. I've as in my role as teacher educator at Goldsmiths, observed many lessons where masks have been in place over the last year and a half or so, when lockdown has ended, as it were, and I've seen teachers teach very effectively with masks happening. They're not ideal. Obviously, it would be preferable for children to see each other's faces, but lessons can run, and the value of in-person lessons cannot be overstated. I think the research that's coming through is that children get set back by many years if they're not in school, and the learning on screen at home just hasn't been adequate. So I'm supportive of this move. It is not ideal, but cost-benefit analysis, it really is the best solution at this particular time, because clearly the medical advice shows that it stops the transmission.
Francis, can I just break in there? I mean, just as an educationalist, what message are we sending out that we're asking our young people to wear masks in school, but older folk in offices and pubs not to?
Well, I think, that's for people who are running the offices and such like. Schools, state schools are publicly funded and they are answerable to the people, aren't they? And we have a duty as best we can to make sure that children are safe and healthy within schools. So we know the masks do actually stop the transmission to a certain degree. And it's cost-benefit analysis. We have to weigh up the kind of problems of cancelling school or taking away the masks against having the masks. And I think the government are making the right decision here, that the masks is not ideal, but it's the best solution that we've got at the moment. And I would say that I've seen...
We've got to leave it there, but it's something we'll have in place until the end of this month at the very least. Dr. Gilbert, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Boris Johnson has been, some say, a disappointment to his libertarian-leaning fans in the Conservative Party, at least recently. A massive national insurance tax hike, the introduction of vaccine passes, repeated lockdowns, and his green focus of rallied opposition on his right wing. Now a group of MPs are increasing that pressure, calling on the PM to tackle the cost of living crisis by scrapping taxes on fuel bills and green levies, which they say will save up to £200 for the average UK household. Well, joining me now, the Conservative peer and former deputy leader of the Conservative Party, Lord Peter Lilly. Peter Lilly, thanks ever so much for your time. I noted today that it's the anniversary of the moment that Margaret Thatcher became the longest-lasting Prime Minister of the 20th century. You served, I think, as a Treasury Minister under her. What do you think she'd make of this government's attitude towards green taxes?
Well, I was her Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. She obviously was one of the first people to put her weight behind the green movement. I had my reservations even then, but so I won't try and pretend that she would have dismissed out of hand what the government is doing. But she would have been very wary about anything which put such a burden on the budgets of ordinary households. And the less well off you are, typically the higher proportion of your income goes on energy. The further north you are, the higher proportion of your income goes on energy because you need more energy to keep warm. And the more likely your jobs are to depend on cheap gas and cheap energy. So I think she would have been a realist and said we can't go on like this, particularly during this short-term crisis. Something must be done to alleviate the problem of ordinary households, and that's what we in this letter to the government propose. It's not actually a general attack on the sort of things that you were mentioning across the board. It's saying there's a problem that we've got to be pragmatic about and deal with.
You're right to underline her environmentalist credentials. Charles Moore, in his authorised biography, makes exactly that point, that she was very early on to some of the concepts that swirl around the green movement and the green question. But just in terms of what you're proposing here, the idea of removing, for instance, or cutting VAT on fuel bills, that's a revenue-raising measure. It creates a black hole that's got to be filled with something. Cut VAT on fuel, fill it how?
Well, we're talking about a short-term measure, and it would have to be met by an increase in borrowing for that short-term period. Likewise, any relief of or suspension of the green levies, which also raise money in the short term. In the longer term, we've got to move or try and find a more economical way of dealing with the problem of global warming and have an energy policy that's cheaper. One of the obvious things is that we should develop our own gas resources rather than import them from abroad. Importing them actually leads to more emissions than if you produce them domestically. And domestically, you get the tax revenues from the production, even if they're not sufficiently plentiful to bring down the prices. And hopefully they would bring down the prices as well.
Isn't you could argue, part of the problem here, and I'll bring this back to where we started with Lady Thatcher. I wonder if she would have tolerated this idea that a lot of the targets that have been set are way beyond the tenure of the serving Prime Minister and Cabinet that's in power at the time. 2035, 2050, Boris Johnson long, long gone. Of course he can glibly say we'll hit these targets. He may not be in politics by that stage.
Well, ever since the the coalition government, well, actually, no, it was the Labour government introduced the Climate Change Act with all-party support. I was one of the 5 people who dissented from it. There have been these commitments to long-term targets, saying it's legally binding, but no clear evidence of who's going to go to jail if these targets aren't met. It certainly won't be the authors of the original Climate Change Act or even those who are ministers at present. So it's a bit mythological to say it's legally binding. And it's not a good way of governing to hand over to judges determination of what our policy should be.
What do you say to those people who will argue that a bit of pump priming now with taxpayers' money might help our technological base? There is an optimistic case, perhaps it's something that Boris Johnson's boosterism is attracted to, this idea that we look at the cost of solar panels and wind power steadily coming down. We look forward to heat pumps, currently very expensive. People recoil from the idea of replacing their gas-fired boilers with them. But actually, we don't know. We don't know how cheap they may become. The recent history suggests they'll be a damn sight cheaper than they currently are.
I devoutly hope they will be, because at present prices, no one could, well, ordinary people will not afford them. There'll be a revolution if we try and force people to spend tens of thousands of pounds on heat pumps, which give them less good heat, which then require tens of thousands more on insulating their houses. So we've got to bring those prices down, or we've got to find an alternative policy. The European Union's been more pragmatic. I'm not always the greatest supporter of the European Union, but they have just declared that nuclear and gas, or they're consulting on it for member states, that the Commission is proposing that nuclear and gas should be considered as green policies, because we're going to require gas as a counterpart for renewables for decades to come. So it's sensible to produce our own in the North Sea, and if it works by fracking, we've got providentially huge reserves of gas, and we're not producing it. America is, and America's gas price is a tiny fraction of our gas price here. Why are we imposing burdens on our people for no very good reason?
It's a fraction of the price. They're able to reshore many of the jobs that went abroad some years ago. Peter, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. More coming up on today's show. We'll be crossing to our reporters across the country to get reaction to that ban on hospital visitors. But first, a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
They're taking a day off at the Met Office, so it's me looking ahead to this evening's weather. The UK looking largely dry in the south, some rain and hill snow further north. Let's have a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, whilst it will be largely dry, it will be rather cloudy this evening, remaining mild though, with temperatures still in double figures. The southeast of England, as well as East Anglia, will also be dry this evening, but again with a fair amount of cloud across the capital. There'll be some outbreaks of rain across Wales as we end Monday, but northern areas, they may also see some clearer spells developing as well. Well, the Midlands this evening should be largely dry, we expect, although southern areas will remain cloudy and mild. The North Midlands may see some clearer spells, but here it will be that little bit colder. Moving up to northern England, we see that band of rain and hill snow moving southwards across the area, behind the rain turning much colder than it has been of late. That might be a comfort to some of you. The cold air will already be across Scotland, with some blustery wintry showers across the north, giving the risk of some icy patches here. Further south, dry but quickly turning frosty, and the clearer but colder weather will also be spreading across Northern Ireland this evening, with any rain quickly clearing to the south of the country. A few showers may follow across the north coast this evening. We'll see the band of rain and hill continue to move southwards, with frequent snow showers and strong winds across the far north. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very warm welcome back. You're watching Colin Brazier here on GB News. The settlement between disgraced sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre, will be released today following an order by US judges. It's believed the agreement made in 2009 could be key to Prince Andrew's civil case. We can go live to our southeast of England reporter, Ellie Costello, who's in Windsor for us right now. Ellie, welcome to you. Can we talk about what we're expecting? Are we getting any guidance? I guess not. What are you expecting?
Hi, Colin. Yes, we are expecting for this case between Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein to be released today. It will be the first time that the world will be able to cast their eyes on that settlement, which was made between the two of them in 2009. Nobody has ever seen that before. We are still waiting on it to be released from a court in New York, and the details, of course, that contains. But we do understand that in those court document, Virginia Giuffre will allege that she was a victim of sex trafficking and abuse by Jeffrey Epstein from the age of 16. And she also alleges as part of that abuse that it involved a number of powerful men, and that is where Prince Andrew is named. Now, Prince Andrew unequivocally denies any wrongdoing, and it is important to stress that there are no criminal proceedings being made against him in the United States or indeed in the United Kingdom. This is a civil case for damages that this will concern.
Ellie, the courtiers at the palace, the royal household, they tend to think about these things looking forward decades. They are acutely aware that Prince Andrew poses them a huge reputational hazard. How does he go to ground? How can they make him less of a public relations liability? There was talk in the Sunday newspapers that he might not lose, but effectively see the HRH title mothballed. He might lose some of his military associations, but he might feel, I've done nothing legally wrong. Why should I change anything?
Well, indeed, this will be a very difficult time for the royal family. The Queen is 95 years old. She's had a very difficult year. She lost her husband in April of last year, and she was suffering with poor health before Christmas. This will be a very distressing time for her second son, her favourite son, as he's often referred to in the press, being accused of such things. A very difficult time for his daughters as well, Beatrice and Eugenie, who are actually on a ski trip in Verbier right now, but Andrew is not joining them He is in Windsor preparing for that virtual court hearing in New York tomorrow, where his lawyers will be asking for the civil lawsuit against him by Virginia Giuffre to be thrown out. And they want that to be thrown out because they are arguing that if Virginia Giuffre can settle with Jeffrey Epstein, that means that he's not only settled with Epstein, but also with various other individuals. And they claim that Prince Andrew should be one of those individuals. Now, of course, there has been calls for his military honours and titles to be removed from him. Lots of people, of course, drawing the parallel between Prince Harry, who, when he stepped back as a senior royal, he was also asked to take off his military titles. That has been called for in the press, but Buckingham Palace did announce on Sunday that that isn't happening as of yet, and they would also not comment on any legal matters, which is standard practice for Buckingham Palace.
Ellie, thanks very much indeed. Ellie Costello there. You're watching Brazier. After the break, does Tony Blair deserve the knighthood he's been awarded? I'll be joined by one of my favourite columnists, Nick Timothy of the Daily Telegraph. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Polly Middlehurst. These are your headlines. Boris Johnson is warning the NHS faces considerable pressure over the coming weeks. The Prime Minister says that although Omicron is milder than other variants, it continues to surge throughout the country. He's ruling out a reduction in the self-isolation period to 5 days, claiming the risk of an infectious person returning to work is too high. On a visit to a vaccination hub in Buckinghamshire, he urged everyone who's not yet had their booster to get one.
The majority of people who are in ICU, sadly, have not been vaccinated, and certainly the vast majority, about 90%, have not been boosted.
Secondary school students in England are being told to take COVID tests before starting the new school term. Face masks will also be mandatory for at least the next 3 weeks. Classes may be merged if too many teachers are absent. A 15-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of Zayan Lina Zayan, also aged 15, was stabbed in a park in South London last Thursday. The defendant will also appear at Bromley Magistrates Court on Tuesday. And as you've been hearing, a legal document which Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex abuse case against him is expected to be made public. The Duke of York's legal team says the case should be thrown out because of a 2009 settlement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Prince Andrew denies any wrongdoing. You're up to date. I'm back with more at 5 o'clock.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, here's a question that was exercising quite a few minds over the weekend. In fact, we think it's such a good question, we'll use it today. Did Tony Blair deserve his knighthood? Many think not. More than, I think it's 400,000, I'm told. 400,000 Britons have now signed a petition to argue for his award to be rescinded. According to Nick Timothy, once himself a former advisor to Prime Minister Theresa May, the Blair knighthood is a reminder of how the former Labour Prime Minister remains an influential figure in the life of the nation. Well, Nick Timothy joins me now, I'm delighted to say. Nick, thanks ever so much for your time. Do appreciate it. Your essential point is that he never really went away.
No, I mean, he's been ever present, hasn't he? And he's still winding people up from left to right. I think at the time I wrote my column yesterday afternoon, I think 100,000 people had signed the petition. It's now at nearly 500,000. My personal view is if we're not going to honour a Prime Minister who won 3 terms, I think is the only Labour Prime Ministers who have won an election in almost half a century, then I don't really know who we are going to honour from the most senior ranks of public service. I think he probably does deserve it. But I think it's actually a good opportunity to assess his legacy and to think about how he continues to affect public life and British life in general today.
There's talk of a legacy suggests he's left the stage, but actually, as you point out in your column, he hasn't, whether it's through the institute that he runs and manages, his interventions on COVID, even the fact the Labour Party seems to be swinging, the sort of swingometer is taking us back to the Blairites away from the Corbyn era. He never left us.
No, that's right. And I mean, I think Peter Mandelson is still writing in the papers and advising Keir Starmer on where to take the Labour Party. I mean, I think what I tried to say in my column today, if you look at some of the really big legal frameworks that govern a lot of our life today, whether that's the Human Rights Act or the Equality Act, and quite often these are the legal frameworks that cause various problems that Conservatives are often railing against and trying to look for solutions. Those legal frameworks date back to the Blair government. The Equality Act was prepared and promised under him, but it was passed under Gordon Brown. But those big legal frameworks go back to those New Labour years. And if Conservatives really are chafing against some of the problems with the culture wars or in the criminal justice system or our inability to deal with the problems in the asylum system, then we ought to be having a debate about what we do about those big legal frameworks.
I mean, those are deep tectonic shifts, aren't they? The Equalities Act, you could argue. I mean, I know that the culture wars are a global phenomenon, but in this country, the Equality Act ushered in. It's felt like it's ushered in an era of identity politics. You mentioned asylum policy. I mean, you think back to the early years of well, not the early years, the sort of mid-years of the Blair premiership and some of those Home Office estimates about the number of Eastern European nationals who would come to the UK, grotesquely off as those estimates were. And there's a sense in which immigration policy under Blair has transformed Britain. I mean, these are big changes under his premiership.
Yeah, huge changes. I mean, I think if you look at British history, we sometimes had negative net migration where more people left the country than came into the country. And before Tony Blair was elected, the highest level of net migration at that point had been in 1994 when it was 77,000. In Blair's first year, those numbers almost doubled. And they just carried on rising from there. And we've had net migration, over 100,000, over 150,000, over 200,000, sometimes even over 300,000 in a single calendar year. And that was a deliberate policy brought about by Blair and members of his government. They the first thing they did was, or one of the first things they did was scrap the primary purpose rule in the immigration system. The asylum system was out of control when, and I think in his first term, he chose not to introduce the transitional controls for the new EU member states. And then, as we say, we mentioned the Human Rights Act. That's one of the reasons why we find it difficult to enforce removals of illegal immigrants and foreign criminals. So the numbers on immigration were down to a series of very deliberate decisions. And what's happened since under conservative governments of different forms is that the Conservatives have promised to try to reduce immigration. They've never really got to grips with it. I think partly because the Blair policies helped to make our economy kind of addicted to these huge numbers of people coming into the country.
Was it more than that? I'll move on from immigration shortly, but if you listen to someone like Peter Hitchens, he will say it was more than just business being addicted to cheap labour. It was overtly, actually no, it wasn't overtly, it was covertly ideological. People like Barbara Roach, the then Home Office Minister, were part of a cadre under Blair who wanted to change Britain in a way that would stick it to the Tories.
Yeah, I think I remember Barbara Roach, when she was appointed immigration minister, said she was appalled at the very idea of taking the job because she didn't really believe in controlling immigration. And that does reflect a mentality on the left and in that New Labour period. And I think it was one of Tony Blair's former speechwriters who said that there was a deliberate attempt to increase immigration because they wanted increased diversity and to rub the right noses in that diversity. There's definitely a support for high immigration because of economic policies and economic thinking, but there's also a kind of philosophical thing that exists among the kind of liberals of all parties, but in particular on the left, that a country is just some kind of platform upon which anybody in the world can come to live and work, when I think conservatives like me would say a country is so much more, and you have to, we inherit traditions and cultures and institutions of a country, and it's our obligation with each generation to make sure it's handed on to the next one in good health.
I remember covering the 2001 election with the Blair battle bus and seeing Tony Blair up close. I remember reading his autobiography and thinking, this is a man who really suits power. And yet, when you say the words Tony Blair now, Nick, to people, you get that kind of reaction that you sometimes see. I can think of a couple of my friends. When you say Margaret Thatcher, who also won 3 terms, you get this sort of reflexive reaction of indignation and fury, and it almost defies logic a little bit. I mean, I get why people are furious about things like the Iraq War. I'm sort of more furious about immigration policy and the Equality Act, which you mentioned, which I think has left a long-term legacy that we're struggling to cope with. But why is it so personal? Why do people feel so vehemently opposed to Tony Blair, the man?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I actually don't think there was this a hatred and highly emotional response to him when he first departed as Prime Minister. It feels like it's something that has grown over time. And there might be different reasons for that, whether the full effects of his policies maybe came to light for some people later. It might be the changes in the Labour Party, where the left of the Labour Party, seized power and now feels much more confident and emboldened. But it's certainly true. I mean, I would say that Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher are the 2 most consequential leaders our country has had in the last half century, and it is true that if you mention their names to large numbers of people, then the reaction is pretty extreme, whether it's positive or negative.
Nick Timothy, so good of you to come on this evening. We've tried to get you on for a bit, so really grateful. Thanks a lot. More and more hospitals are closing doors to visitors as the number of COVID cases rise. The University Hospital of North Tees in Stockton is the latest to ban visitors following a spike in cases in the area. Our reporter Rachel Sweeney has been monitoring the developing situation in the northeast and sent this update from the University Hospital of North Durham, another hospital banning visitors.
County Durham and Darlington NHS Trust has taken the decision to ban visitors from its hospitals. This comes after the same decision was made for the University Hospital of North Tees, the Sunderland Royal and South Tyneside District Hospital too. This is because of a rise in the number of COVID cases and local outbreaks. All hospital trusts have said the decision was a difficult one to make, but one that they said they had to. Some visitors will be allowed inside hospitals under extreme and exceptional circumstances, and families are asked to contact wards for individual cases. Now, we've had a lot of viewers getting in touch with opinions on this. Chris Clark said he's due to be a dad and he hopes it doesn't affect births. Chris Johnson said it sounds like a necessary evil because the risk of infection is great. Owen Weir said cancer treatment is hard enough without doing it alone. Rupert Myers said we need to trust our medical professionals. Shelley 60 said with an iPad and a phone, does she need visitors? She can manage without them fine. Now, Chris Hobson, Chief Executive of the NHS Providers, which represents health trusts, posted a 25-tweet thread, and in it he said the NHS is under different and arguably more pressure than it was in January 2021. Hospital admissions in England are at the highest level since January 2021. He said that there's a rapid increase in community infections, and that's the issue here in County Durham and also in Stockton, where we've been broadcasting from for GBNews all morning. He said the NHS is working flat out. The next couple of days is crucial and they'll review the situation constantly. Now, what we must remember is that there is a situation of staff shortages in our hospitals. There's been a huge issue in some areas. Nearly 25,000 staff in NHS hospital trusts were off with COVID or isolating on Boxing Day, and that was up 31% from the week before. It's thought that more hospital trusts will follow suit, but for now, that's the latest.
That was the latest. Rachel Sweeney there. The latest from our Twitter poll tonight, assessing or getting you to assess what you think the prospects are for Prince Andrew somehow being reintegrated into public life. Not looking good on the basis of what you're telling us. Over 3,000 of you voted already in not very long. Is it time for Prince Andrew to surrender his HRH title and military associations? 83% of you say yes, it's time he did that. In the next hour, we'll bring you those COVID figures. How are those hospitalisation figures looking? That's increasingly seeming to be the key metric rather than the number of people who are amounting to COVID cases. We'll talk that through with a GP. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK looking largely dry in the south, some rain and hill snow further north. Let's have a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, whilst it will be largely dry, it will be rather cloudy this evening, remaining mild though, with temperatures still in double figures. The southeast of England, as well as East Anglia, will also be dry this evening, but again with a fair amount of cloud across the capital. There'll be some outbreaks of rain across Wales as we end Monday, but northern areas, they may also see some clearer spells developing as well. Well, the Midlands this evening should be largely dry, we expect, although southern areas will remain cloudy and mild. The North Midlands may see some clearer spells, but here it will be that little bit colder. Moving up to northern England, we see that band of rain and hill snow moving southwards across the area, behind the rain turning much colder than it has been of late. That might be a comfort to some of you. The cold air will already be across Scotland, with some blustery wintry showers across the north, giving the risk of some icy patches here. Further south, dry but quickly turning frosty, and the clearer but colder weather will also be spreading across Northern Ireland this evening, with any rain quickly clearing to the south of the country. A few showers may follow across the north coast this evening. We'll see the band of rain and hill continue to move southwards, with frequent snow showers and strong winds across the far north. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, like it or not, we're going to spend a bit more time talking about COVID, in particular as we look forward to the release in the next 40 minutes, or thereabouts, from NHS England of those latest COVID figures, and this emerging distinction between hospitalisations, the number of people who are so sufficiently ill, seriously ill to require hospital treatment, versus the number of cases running away, at times exponentially, to use that dreadful word, but actually the number of hospitalisations remaining relatively static. That's certainly the hope of the government at Westminster. Just got the figures in for Scotland, a little ahead of what Westminster are reporting. There, the figures published by the Scottish Government today, 65,000 new tests for COVID-19, 35% were positive. There are, and this is the key element again, 1,031 people in hospital on Sunday with recently confirmed COVID. Of those, 38 were in intensive care. That would seem to suggest that, again, we're seeing lots of cases, relatively few people actually requiring intensive care or indeed hospital treatment of any particular description. Well, let's turn to one person on the front line, an NHS GP who can ponder on some of this, Dr. Mo Kaki. Mo, thanks ever so much for joining us. Can we talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of activity at the surgery, and in particular, I was talking to Carol Sikora, the eminent oncologist last week, who was saying he's really worried now, really worried about the number of undiagnosed tumours that are getting through, that are not being detected, and will ultimately result in a tsunami of future cancer cases.
Yes, I mean, I think it's one of those things that we have been really passionate to engage the public about, because we know that when there's a pandemic, when there's illness, when there's worry for yourself, for your relatives, you tend to do the things that you know best, to stay in, to try to protect yourself. And also we're passionate about the NHS and trying not to overburden the system. But sometimes that means that people miss the opportunity to come and see their GP about things that have been worrying them, strange growths or symptoms that have been persisting for more than 3 or 4 weeks. That could be a cancer. So We know that in the pandemic, there was a huge area that a reduction in lung cancer referrals, a reduction in heart problems being picked up. So we launched the Still Here, Still Care campaign to tell the public that we're still here, we're still around to support you. And I think that's another message we want to echo again, to say, look, if you are worried about something, if you've had a symptom that has been persisting for more than 3 weeks, please do come and see your GP so we can check you out.
It was about 5 weeks ago, Mo, we talked to the South African clinician who first alerted the world to Omicron. And even then, she was pretty sceptical about not its transmissibility. There's no denying it's incredibly effective at that. We can all agree on that. But its virulence, or its lethality, I should say. In terms of what you're seeing in the trenches, would you endorse what she had to say, or is that not your experience, actually?
No, I think she's 100% correct, actually. What we've seen so far, and I have the advantage of having a foot in the community, working in my surgery, and I work in the hospital as well to support still with the COVID efforts. So what we're seeing is exactly what you said. The transmissibility of this is huge. We're seeing people with coughs, colds, and many positive tests, and COVID is continuing to be transmissible, and this new Omicron variant is highly transmissible. But in some ways, the good news is that the people who are getting it are not as sick as previous. They're not perhaps getting as short of breath as previously. Chest pain symptoms are not so bad. The general exhaustion that normally lasts for a couple of days now was something that was really knocking people out for weeks previously. So we're seeing that the symptoms seem to be milder. And I think that's why, as you said earlier, the hospitalization rates are not increasing exponentially at the time we would expect there to be an increase, a peak. And really, that's kind of good news. And I think there's a few things that we're doing that are sensible. And if you're watching this thinking, well, how have we been doing this? Well, the variant itself is a little bit less virulent. But actually, what is being great is the uptake of the vaccinations, the double vaccination, the booster. People are wearing masks as much as they can and trying to be clever and socially isolate or socially distance where appropriately. So they're not trying to overburden each other and get sick. So those are good things that we're doing at the moment.
Just as you say, part of your time spent in general practice, part of it's in the hospital. In the hospital setting, we're hearing these reports, as I mentioned earlier, there's an NHS trust in Lincolnshire, a critical emergency, so many of their staff are off. What's your experience of what's happening there? Is it people who are quarantining because they've had COVID, they've come into contact with somebody who had it? Is there a sense in which perhaps people are unnecessarily taking time off because they've got to abide by the 7-day rule in England, longer elsewhere? What's your sense?
Yeah, it's to do with the fact that we know that this Omicron variant is so transmissible. So people are picking it up, and ultimately, we're seeing COVID patients regularly in the hospital environment. So there's a high chance that a lot of my colleagues have picked up COVID once again, reinfected, because of the fact that, hey, there's a really transmissible virus. Now, the rules are the rules. We have to, once you have the virus, self-isolate. And it makes complete sense because ultimately, even if you have mild symptoms and feel that you could go and contribute and work, it will be unsafe to potentially risk patients who are more vulnerable or other colleagues and completely disseminate the system by getting everyone really sick. So there is an important self-isolation period. And of course, that has to be exercised. But what we have been seeing is when that comes to its 5 or 7 or 10-day duration, people have had their repeat tests and found they're negative, hey, the NHS staff are welcome and want to come back and work. So it's really good to see the spirit of working and wanting to support the NHS at this time. But of course, we've got a virus that's really transmissible, so many staff are picking it up.
We've got to cut it short there. Dr. Mo Kaki, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks ever so much. It's 5 o'clock. Hi there, and a very warm welcome to you this afternoon. It's a new week, a new year, and indeed a new show. Brazier brings you 2 hours of fast-paced news, weekdays 4 until 6. Coming up, live at 5, as we assess the latest just released or soon to be released daily COVID figures. The MP, Andrew Bridgen, will join me here in the studio to explain why he thinks forcing kids to wear masks in schools is daft. E-scooter safety. We've often debated the threat they pose to elderly pedestrians in Manchester. The family of a 74-year-old are mourning his death while riding an e-scooter. And the row over Alcoholics Anonymous, founded by Christians, but are their meetings the place for prayer? All that and more coming up. But first, the news with Polly.
Good evening, it's 5 o'clock and here is the latest GB News. Boris Johnson is warning the NHS faces considerable pressure over the coming weeks due to increasing COVID cases. The Prime Minister says although Omicron is milder than other variants, it continues to surge through the country. He's ruling out a reduction, therefore, in the self-isolation period to 5 days, claiming the risk of an infectious person returning to work is just too high. On a visit to a vaccination hub in Buckinghamshire, he urged everyone who's not yet had their booster to get one.
I just want to make a crucial point to people who are thinking about getting their booster. There are still quite a lot of people who have had 2 jabs but haven't had the third. A third jab really does make a big difference. There are 2 million slots just this week to get your booster, so get boosted now. It can make all the difference in the world. The majority of people who are in ICU, sadly, have not been vaccinated, and certainly the vast majority, about 90%, have not been boosted.
Boris Johnson. Well, secondary school students in England are being told to take COVID tests before starting the new term. Face masks are going to be mandatory for at least the next 3 weeks, and classes may be merged if too many teachers are off sick. The new rules are being introduced by the Education Secretary to try to curb the spread of the Omicron variant. Nadeem Zahawi says schools must do everything they can to protect face-to-face learning.
I want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer. I don't want children to be wearing masks. In fact, I've also asked my team in the department to look at doing a piece of research for the longer term as to the impact of wearing masks in classroom would have on students and on their ability to learn.
Meanwhile, away from COVID, a legal document which Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex abuse case against him is expected to be made public. The Duke of York's legal team says the proceedings should be thrown out because of a 2009 settlement between Virginia Giuffre and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She alleges Prince Andrew sexually assaulted her when she was 17. He strongly denies any wrongdoing. The royal commentator Jenny Bond says Prince Andrew's friendships were questionable.
No doubt that his judgment, if nothing else, has been called into question by the fact that he has had friendships not with just one sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, but now we know 2, a very long-standing friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell, which goes back to university days.
Jenny Bond. Now, tributes have been paid to a 14-year-old girl who died after being hit by a car in the West Midlands on New Year's Eve. Olivia Kolec's family described her as the brightest star in their lives. A 39-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by driving under the influence of drugs. He's been released under investigation pending further inquiries. And ministers are being urged to bring in a new law that would guarantee all workers 2 weeks of paid leave after a bereavement. The SNP's Patricia Gibson is bringing forward a private member's bill to Westminster, and she says it would give people time to grieve without worrying about financial pressures. In the United States, 2 people are missing following wildfires in the state of Colorado. More than 9 square miles was charred and nearly 1,000 homes and buildings were destroyed by the blaze. Police are yet to establish a cause, although investigators say they haven't yet ruled out arson. An internet regulator has found a 6-fold increase in visits to websites which promote violence towards women. That's in the UK last year. Incel websites, as they're known, or involuntary celibate websites, promote hatred towards women. The Centre for Countering Digital Hate says there were more than 638,000 hits every month on 3 of the largest sites. That's up from over 114,000 on the year before. That's your latest news. I'm back in half an hour. Now let's get back to Colin.
Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode. From Nottingham, the story of scientists in the city who've come up with a drone that women can call on if they feel threatened while out late at night. Also, what do the latest COVID numbers mean for you and yours? I'll be talking to the Tory MP leading opposition to masks in English classrooms. And tonight's Brazier angle, a few words of advice for Prince Andrew, why it's time for the Duke of York to go to ground for good. We'll share the results of our Twitter poll, which asks whether you think it's time he surrendered his royal title and military associations. But let's return to one of our top stories this afternoon. If you have school-aged children, chances are they'll be back in the classroom this week after the Christmas holiday. The schools they return to are in danger of becoming an ideological battleground. On one side, the teaching unions, they're striking again a militant tone about the need to prevent infection and keep their members working. In the middle, it seems the government. Over the weekend, the Education Secretary announced that secondary schools in England will require pupils to wear masks at least until the end of the month. And on the other side of the divide, rebel Tory MPs, because the imposition of masks in schools is being done as guidance, not by a change in the law. Those MPs will not get another opportunity to mount another potentially successful backbench revolt, but they are making their disappointment clear, that is for sure. One of them is the Conservative MP, Andrew Bridgen, who's the MP for North West Leicestershire and a prominent critic of elements of the government's COVID policy. Delighted to say he's taken the time to come in here in the studio. Andrew, thanks for doing that.
You're welcome.
There's a strategy here, setting aside what the unions think about things, that the government's keen to make sure that super spreaders, we can agree that children are pretty good at spreading COVID, don't mean that there are so few teachers in school that classes are going to be merged and all the rest of it. So this is a prudential measure by a government that's keen to keep classrooms open.
Well, these measures have been brought in, as you've pointed out, by the back door. They're not mandated, they're recommendations, but they'll be seized on by schools. Even under Plan B, there were some recommendations for schools about communal areas. They were already being gold-plated in my constituency. I was hearing of children at junior schools being asked to, or made to, wear masks in the playground out in the open air. This is under Plan B, and this is the creep that we're going to get. I personally have some scepticism around the efficacy of the science around mask wearing, particularly when they're being worn by people who aren't trained to wear them and being replaced regularly, and even more so with children. And I think the children in our country have borne the brunt of the COVID regulations. And I think in any civilised society, and I think we do live in a civilised society, we protect our young people and our children. We don't ask them to make sacrifices to protect us. And of course, the big hypocrisy of bringing masks into schools is that no one in any offices, or even government offices, are being asked to wear masks.
The teachers don't want to see masks brought in because they want to inhibit communication or make it harder for young kids in particular to learn how to speak properly by aping what their teachers are doing. They're worried, the unions are worried, that if kids come in with COVID, Omicron is obviously massively transmissible, and whether a teacher's pinged or actually contract COVID itself, they're going to be taken out of that teaching environment. So what they're concerned about, they say, is to make sure that there are enough teachers to go around, to make sure we've got the quality education that I'm going to start using some cliches now, that all our children deserve.
Well, let's be clear. The teachers' union is there to represent the interests of teachers, but who will speak for the children who've had their education devastated, their social interaction and development devastated throughout this pandemic? And the siren calls from the teachers' union previously have been completely unfounded. They said that they were going to have mass infection of teachers. When we look at the infection patterns across different professions, they were at no more risk, and there's no evidence that teachers are at any more risk than any other profession from contracting any other form of the variant. And as we know, the Omicron variant is extremely mild. And there's some very, very good science coming out of South Africa when they've been spot on the money all the way through. Everything they've told us has come true in the UK, that although contracting the Alpha, the Beta or the Delta variant will not protect you against the Omicron variant, neither will vaccination to a greater or lesser extent from contracting it. Once you've contracted the Omicron variant, there's evidence now you have considerable protection against other variants.
What about spending money on big ventilation?
Ventilation.
Is that a canard?
That is, I know. I think we all have our own education experiences. I think better ventilation in classroom is going to be conducive to better health, better working conditions for pupils and for teachers, and that is an issue I think we need to deal with.
Andrew, stay with us, because our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin has been speaking to staff at a school in Rotherham to find out how they are coping with COVID cases. He sent us this report with the background to the situation.
Government's determined to do all it can to keep schools open. This is what Education Secretary Nadeem Sahawi told GB News this morning.
I want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer. As soon as we see that we can transition this particular variant from where we are today, where obviously London was the epicentre, but it's now rising in other parts of the country. As soon as we make sure that staff absenteeism is under control, we were at 8% at the end of last year.
We could see classes mixed. Now that would be a big contrast to the previous bubble system. Former teachers and non-teaching staff could also be used to keep classes going. A letter was sent by the government to all head teachers urging them to do all they can to keep schools open. Ben Mallinson is the principal of the Ruth Gorse Academy in Leeds and told me what he made of the letter.
We recognise that we are going to have to react to a number of government announcements over the coming weeks and months. But what we ask for is clarity and as much notice as possible before implementing those plans. The key thing for us is to make sure that students are receiving an excellent education.
Ministers say they're also making sure there are more CO2 monitors and air purifiers being delivered to schools, and that mask wearing in secondary schools will help limit the impact. But Sally Kincaid, who's the secretary of the Teachers Union, the NEU in Wakefield, says she's not convinced enough's being done to keep teachers and pupils safe.
So we were offered, 7,000 ventilators for classrooms in the country? Well, there's over 300,000 classrooms in the country. That's about 2.3%. Shameful, shameful. This could have been sorted, the ventilation could have been sorted a long time ago. So all we've got now is a situation where people are incredibly nervous about going back to school, not just the staff, but pupils and parents too.
The government has also ordered a study into the effects of mask wearing on children's mental health, their learning, and how it could limit the impact of COVID spreading in schools. But while we wait for the findings of those studies, it seems that teenagers here in Yorkshire and across England will be adding a mask to their school uniform.
Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen and I admiring blue skies there in Rotherham earlier today. But in terms of the COVID picture that's emerging, Andrew, we'll get the data a little later this hour. And again, we'll draw our viewers' attention to the disparity between hospitalisations, people sufficiently seriously ill to have to go into hospital with COVID, and the rocketing number of cases. Is it your sense that the Prime Minister's gamble that this is going to be a relatively weak variant of COVID, as evidenced by early data from South Africa, is paying off, or might there yet be a sting in the tail? We don't really know, do we?
I think the picture is becoming very clear, and if we pay attention to the science we saw coming out of South Africa 3-4 weeks ago, where the variant originated, that picture is being mirrored out in the UK. Also, because it's so transmissible, it's going to run out of hosts very quickly. It's likely to be probably peaked already in London. And if we can manage in London, where apparently a third of the population had no vaccination whatsoever, and the hospitals have coped, we should be able to cope easily in the rest of the country. And I think it's interesting, I saw some figures today. It suggested that despite Scotland having harsh lockdown measures, they'd actually only had one patient in intensive care in 5 weeks.
My goodness, I was just looking at the figures of Scotland, actually. They've said, I think they've got 30, well, the figure I read said 38. We may discuss statistics a little later on. Just in terms of the Christmas break, time to reflect on the COVID story as a backbencher, and in particular the revolt that we saw in, 5-6 weeks ago, probably less than that, wasn't it?
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. The taste for revolt that sometimes comes for backbenchers, if you were a government whip right now, as part of your New Year's resolutions, what would you be thinking and saying and doing?
The first time you revolt against your own party rebel against the whip, it leaves you with a sick feeling in your stomach. I rebelled, first of all, over votes to get us an EU referendum back in 2011. It does become easier the more you do it, and quite honestly, those brave backbenchers, democracy in action, when we held the government to account, due to the failings of the Labour Party to act as a reasonable opposition, they went along and backed the government. I think we've been proved and vindicated correct, that everything we said about Omicron, it was mild, we're going to cope with it, we don't need severe lockdown measures. They've all come to fruition. That won't deter backbenchers from rebelling when they believe they're in the right and the government is making a wrong move in the future.
Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP. You are watching Brazier here on GB News. We've got some news on Prince Andrew after the break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Ahead to this evening's weather, the UK looking largely dry in the south, some rain and hill snow further north. Let's have a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, whilst it will be largely dry, it will be rather cloudy this evening, remaining mild though, with temperatures still in double figures. The southeast of England, as well as East Anglia, will also be dry this evening, but again with a fair amount of cloud across the capital. There'll be some outbreaks of rain across Wales as we end Monday. But northern areas, they may also see some clearer spells developing as well. Well, the Midlands this evening should be largely dry, we expect, although southern areas will remain cloudy and mild. The North Midlands may see some clearer spells, but here it will be that little bit colder. Moving up to northern England, we see that band of rain and hill snow moving southwards across the area. Behind the rain, turning much colder than it has been of late. That might be a comfort to some of you. The cold air will already be across Scotland, with some blustery wintry showers across the north, giving the risk of some icy patches here. Further south, dry but quickly turning frosty, and the clearer but colder weather will also be spreading across Northern Ireland this evening, with any rain quickly clearing to the south of the country. A few showers may follow across the north coast this evening. We'll see the band of rain and hill continue to move southwards, with frequent snow showers and strong winds across the far north. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up.
I hug everyone I
We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
We've been discussing the prospects for the effective rehabilitation into public life, or otherwise, of Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. Now, here's a legal document which Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex abuse case against him. It's just been made public, and Polly's got some of the details. Polly.
Colin, thanks very much indeed. Well, in fact, we are going through the detail right now. It's just been released. As Colin was saying, this is a civil case for damages being brought by Virginia Giuffre. She alleges that Prince Andrew forced her to have sex 2 decades ago, it must be said, when she was under the age of 18. That photograph has become synonymous with this accusation. Prince Andrew's legal team says he strenuously denies all the allegations against him. In fact, you may remember that BBC television interview that was put out by the programme Newsnight. He said he'd never met the lady and had no recollection at all of ever having met her. So what we're doing today is we're looking at the events coming out of New York right now. This all concerns Prince Andrew and the case against him, and indeed his relationship with the late financier Jeffrey Epstein and the agreement Jeffrey Epstein made in 2009. It was a settlement agreement, a completely confidential agreement with Virginia Giuffre at the time, before she filed her civil case for damages against Prince Andrew. Now, Giuffre's lawsuit accuses Andrew, as I said, of forcing her to have sex more than 2 decades ago when she was under the age of 18 at the London home of the former Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell, and abusing her at 2 of Epstein's homes. Giuffre, who's 38 years old and is known on the internet for having pushed this over the last 10 years or so in an effort, she says, to get the truth, is seeking an unspecified amount of damages in that civil lawsuit filed in Manhattan. Now, we know that the case against Prince Andrew is in its early stages. The US District Judge in New York, in central Manhattan, Judge Lewis Kaplan, has said a trial could begin as late as September, December of this year if no settlement is reached. And we know as well that on hearing Andrew's motion to dismiss the case, that was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Andrew has, of course, given up many of his royal duties during November, since November 2019, stating his association with Jeffrey Epstein had become a disruption to my family's work. So right now, that document has been released. It's a dense legal document. We're sifting through it, and we will let you know if that document contains anything which will be pertinent to the position that Prince Andrew is in. I must stress once again, Prince Andrew and his legal team strenuously deny the allegations put in front of him.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. Of course, the Court of Public Opinion may yet find against Prince Andrew. According to a YouGov survey about 3 or 4 months ago, 2/3 of the British public feel there is no scope, no role for Prince Andrew in public life now left, regardless of what any courts decide. Now, an Alcoholics Anonymous group has been ordered not to recite the Lord's Prayer at the start of meetings. The group in Somerset was told by leaders it had become too Christian-focused and has been removed from the local authorities' online directory. This despite the fact that the group has its origins in Christianity, in an early Christian movement. Joining me now, the director of the Christian Concern Group, Andrea Williams. Andrea, thanks ever so much for your time. Appreciate it. Alcoholics Anonymous, 1930s Christian roots. Tell us about it.
Absolutely, rooted firmly in Christian values and Christian precepts, out of the founder Frank Buchanan, really coming radically converted in the 1930s and moving away from a strong alcoholic addiction. And it was really then that he formed this group to really help others who, like himself, were addicted to alcohol. And that's been the root of Alcoholics Anonymous ever since.
I mean, I'm guessing it varies from group to group, and I don't know how much. I don't know the way I've never been. I don't know how AA work, to what degree individual groups have autonomy, whether there are some overarching guiding principles, whether there is a sort of trickle down of that Christianity. I mean, Andrea, how does it work? I mean, do they have?
Well, Mr. Palmer, in this particular group, Mr. Palmer, who ran the group, had been in the group since the 1980s. And it was through the group in Somerset that he had been introduced himself to Christianity. And he said that became something that was radically life transforming for him. It changed everything about his life. And now, decades on, he at the age of 68 is running the group. And what he was doing was offering at the start of the group the Lord's Prayer. That was something that he did. He simply offered it, really to just try and give a framework for it. No, there was no real pressure. No one seemed unhappy about it. Many people absolutely loved the group, and many people have been changed and helped as a result of it. Indeed, in January, there are many groups that start up, groups that are reaching out to people to say, do you want to give up alcohol for the month of January? Do you want to change your lifestyle? And many of them are rooted in all kinds of philosophies, but Alcoholics Anonymous has never made any secret of its history rooted deeply in Christian faith. And Mr. Palmer is very much inspired by his Christian faith and wants to see others come to it. But the reason why he's there in Alcoholics Anonymous is primarily because he wants to see people free of alcoholic addiction.
I mean, look, Andrea, for God botherers like you and I, this is all fine, isn't it? But actually, if you turn up with a serious alcohol addiction problem to one of these meetings, and we know that there is a, at times quite assertive secularist mindset, and that's fine. And people turn up to one of these meetings, and suddenly they feel that they're being preached to, proselytized in a way that they feel uncomfortable with. Is that to deny them access to a service which they ought to be able to access?
Well, I think that Mr. Palmer and Alcoholics Anonymous are very clear that when people come to Alcoholics Anonymous, they're coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're there because they're reaching out because they want to be free of all the stuff that addiction to alcohol brings. And Mr. Palmer's very clear that, and you meet Mr. Palmer, you speak to Mr. Palmer, it's very clear that his motivation is to see people get free of their alcoholic addiction. And he would say that really there's no kind of, bashing around the head or forcing of Christianity in these groups at all. They're very professional in terms of the way that they run it, but they also don't hide. Mr. Palmer doesn't hide his motivation or the roots of the group, which is indeed Christian. So if that comes up quite naturally, then for sure that's something that he speaks about. But it's not something that he's forcing or bothering people with. It's just part of being human. It's part of natural conversation. And I think what this shows again is that just generally in society, we could talk about mindfulness, we could talk about yoga, we could talk about a whole manner of other things, and nobody would bat an eyelid. But dare to pray almost the Lord's Prayer in a situation like this, and someone doesn't like that, then you can find yourself in trouble. Bear in mind that Mr. Palmer's been in this group for some 4 decades almost, and been committed to it and seen many lives changed and transformed. And of course, he himself would say, I've been changed and transformed, not just because I went to the group of Alcoholics Anonymous, but because I've met real and living and transformative faith through the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
So,
I think, actually, Andrea, on a slightly different note, we were talking about this last week, actually, in the context of knife crime. And a lot of the people who were reformed gang members have often found God in prison. And actually one of the reasons they're doing the work on pretty mean streets at times is inspired by their
exactly
Christian
what
faith.
happens.
And in a sense, there is a quid pro quo, you could argue, which is if you are prepared to give up your time voluntarily and offer people a service to help them break with an addiction, then maybe you know, it's a small price to pay to expect them to just recite the Lord's Prayer. Andrew, we've got to leave it there, but appreciate your time as ever. Andrew Williams joining us. We've been asking you for your thoughts on Prince Andrew. He's in the news, we just heard from Polly a few moments ago with that legal news, but also tomorrow a judge in America with something important to say about the prospects for that civil action that may embroil him and indeed ultimately as a consequence the royal family. Our question to you today, is it time for Prince Andrew to surrender his HRH title and military associations? We'll be talking to Colonel Richard Kemp about this a little later on in the show. There are those, it's been reported today, who are uncomfortable in the 9 or so military organisations where, for instance, the Grenadier Guards, where Prince Andrew is the Colonel-in-Chief, a former soldier from the Grenadier Guards, former guardsman, saying he's really uncomfortable now about this association. It's reported that sometimes officers in the mess who toast his health are uncomfortable in doing that, given that all that's been swirling around Prince Andrew in recent months, if not years. Some of the emails, very briefly. Lisa says, in this country, as in America, your innocence is always assumed. An accused person does not have to prove his innocence. It's up to the accuser to prove guilt. David says, much the same, the cornerstone of English-speaking law is innocence until guilt is proved. This is by far the best way of ensuring real justice is done. Darryl says, absolutely right, Colin. As an ex-member of the regiment, he is still colonel of. He needs to do this sooner than later, even if he's innocent, because he is a disgrace as far as I can see. Matthew says, also an ex-Grenadier Guardsman, of which he says he's a disgrace to the regiment. Ben says, it's a civil case, not a criminal one. That point seems to be being overlooked a lot here. And Jim says, again, this is a recurrent theme here. Whatever happened to the legal concept of innocence until proven to be guilty? Why should his life be destroyed by a woman with questionable motives? She sues in a civil court, not a criminal one, doubtless expecting a cash offer to settle out of court. And another viewer says it's time for him to face accountability for his actions regarding that relationship between Epstein and Maxwell. Time to stop hiding behind his mother. Keep those thoughts coming in. The vote, deeply one-sided. 83% of you think yes is the answer to the question. Is it time for Prince Andrew to surrender his HRH titles? Maybe not surrender them, but mothball them, seems to be the suggestion from the Sunday Times yesterday, and those military associations as well. Coming up, after the break, we're going to be talking about the future of e-scooters. There's been another crash, another fatal crash. This one led to the death of a 74-year-old. But first, time for the latest news headlines.
Good evening, your latest news headlines. And as you've been hearing in the last half hour, a 12-page legal document which Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex abuse case against him has been made public. The document states Miss Giuffre settled the case for more than $500,000. That's £371,000. That's one of the major details coming out of it, as well as the terms of the deal applying to second parties and other potential defendants, categories that could apply to Epstein's friends. Prince Andrew denies any wrongdoing. We'll have further coverage on that 12-page legal document later on. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is warning the NHS faces considerable pressure over the coming weeks. The Prime Minister says although Omicron is milder than other variants, it continues to surge through the country. He's ruling out a reduction in the self-isolation period to 5 days, claiming the risk of an infectious person returning to work is too high. On a visit to a vaccination hub in Buckinghamshire, he urged everyone who's not yet had their booster to get one.
Majority of people who are in ICU, sadly, have not been vaccinated, and certainly the vast majority, about 90%, have not been boosted.
Secondary school students in England are being told to take COVID tests before starting the new term. Face masks will also be mandatory for at least the next 3 weeks. Classes may be merged if too many teachers are off sick with COVID. You're up to date. I'll be back with more on today's main stories. Top of the hour. See you then.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very warm welcome back. You're watching Colin Brazier here on GB News. Keeping an eye out for those latest COVID figures. Normally a bit earlier, today a bit later, bank holiday, about 5:30 we were told. So as soon as they appear, we'll try and go through them with you. Now on New Year's Day, 74-year-old grandfather David Ackers died after crashing an e-scooter into two parked cars. It was revealed last month that teenager George McGowan died following an e-scooter collision in the summer. Their tragic deaths have fueled the ongoing debate over whether these vehicles, that's what they are, it depends on your point of view, doesn't it, should be allowed on our roads. Well, we're joined by Michael Quintana from the pro-e-scooter think tank ridables.org. Michael, thanks so much for your time. I mentioned the other fatality. I think there have been 4 in the last year. I'm sure you're in a better position to know than I, but hundreds of injuries as well. We accept the risk, if you take the view, and I'm sure you do, that actually congestion on Britain's roads and streets is such that we need the flexibility of a smaller, more environmentally conscious form of transport.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, these things are extremely useful. They're, you know, they're economic, everything that we always talk about, you know, economic, you know, so they're cost effective, you know, very low barrier of entry. We're not really concerned about the inherent safety of the device. You know, this the gentleman who's passed away, which is always genuinely unfortunate. You know, nobody wants to hear about you know, anybody getting hurt. But in September, there was a gentleman who was similarly, he was you know, killed as well, and he was on a bicycle. He crashed into a parked car on a bicycle with the helmet, and unfortunately passed away. So we, you know, in a way, we have to kind of look at the grander, you know, the bigger picture, and are there inherent problems? And if they're not, then how can we, you know, encourage, you know, safer usage, you know, these kind of things. All problems that we had when we brought cars on the road back, you know, way back when as well.
Michael, there's a problem, though, with the bigger picture, because, in a sense, there isn't a bigger picture. There are several different pictures. The picture's very different if you're in a swanky part of North London, as opposed to some more, how can I put it, chaotic, benighted, troubled parts of the UK. I was talking to somebody who works for a partially sighted charity recently who said, it's like the Wild West in parts of the UK now. These unlicensed e-scooters flying around at speeds up to 30 miles per hour, sometimes by people who've had too much to drink or have taken drugs, who pay no regard, even if they knew what the law is in terms of where they can ride, not on the pavements, not on the road. They just don't care.
Yeah, and that we don't stand for. Our stance as an organization is e-scooters should be ridden exactly where you would ride a bike, on the pavement, on a bike, sorry, not on the pavement, on a bike path, on the road, anywhere where you would logically ride a bike. Now, so one of the issues that a lot of people don't realize is it's actually the consequences are smaller. The fees and fines are smaller if you're caught riding an e-scooter on the pavement. So with legalization, we can start to enforce these kind of things and say, look, if you're on the pavement, there is a fine. We can create accountability, whether it's through a license plate, like a small license plate scheme, any of these kind of things that we can do to encourage or discourage people from riding dangerously. But I don't think that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think the benefits far outweigh the problems overall. And there's always going to be people doing stupid things, whether it's on an e-scooter, on a bike, in a car, or any other mode of transport. We've seen these problems. We don't ban them. What we need to do is look at how can we address them, how can we change them. And now the previous.
Sorry, Michael, I was going to make the point. I mean, it's a very obvious point, but I'm sure some of our viewers will be thinking it, if not saying it to the television, as we look at an image of 74-year-old David Ackers. I mean, in a sense, we can't get into the particulars of this case. I don't know them, you don't know them. It'll be a matter for the Coronial Service and the police. But it's a reasonable assumption, if not in this specific instance, that in other cases where people have perished, that they wouldn't have done. You're making the point that accidents happen to cars, etc. In a car, you are a less vulnerable human being than you would be, obviously, on an e-scooter.
Yeah, that's true. Obviously, you're less vulnerable in the car, but then if you're under the influence, if you lose concentration in a car, everyone else around you is definitely at an exponentially higher, risk of vulnerability. Like people who've come up on the pavement, and there's been fatalities there. I think what we need to look at is the devices themselves. Are they inherently dangerous? So for every, let's say, 1 or 2 or 5 accidents that we're hearing across 6 months or a year, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of journeys being taken where there are no accidents, where there are no reported injuries, and it's again unfortunate when there are, but it's a little bit of a testament to the safety of the devices right now, that the only time we hear about them is in the news, because they're not happening, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis.
Michael, I think that's moot. I think that's moot. I think you're right. I would have expected more serious accidents to be making the news, particularly in the winter with the dark nights. But actually, if you do a fairly cursory internet search, there's quite a high incidence of low-level injuries that's reported, for instance, in the regional and local press. So I think that's potentially a moot point. Just in terms of where you're coming from on this, obviously you're really pro think tank, lobbying the government, maybe in this country, maybe
pro
abroad.
Within reason.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
But my point is, I just wonder how you feel this debate is moving now. It really rankles with some people. Other people are enthusiasts. From your point of view, the message you need to get through is to government, is to policymakers. What are they making of it as things currently stand?
In my opinion, let's put it this way. Obviously, I represent our organization as well, but in my opinion, I think we've moved beyond the issue of inherent safety and the logistics of how should these devices be governed. There's a million ways to roll it out. Other countries have done so. Even Ireland recently has done so. I know we take our time a bit further sometimes, but my opinion is this has become more of a political hot potato more than an issue of are these devices safe or not. And when you get these hot potatoes, political hot potatoes, all of a sudden it becomes, even if you represent, even if you represent, hey, you're pro e-scooter, you have to look at your constituency and look at, well, where do my constituents stand on this? And I think that's the area that we're in. It's not a hard problem to solve, overall. Yeah. A lot of other countries have done this already.
Yeah, those MPs, our legislators, they've got to work out whether it's a legitimate moral panic or something that's being whipped up unnecessarily. Yeah. Michael Quintana, we've got to leave it there, but appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much.
No, thank you for having me.
Women walking home at night could be protected by drones that arrive within 4 minutes, so runs the theory, of alerting a phone app. This is the work of a company called Drone Defence, set to send plans to the government recommending that their technology, which will be fitted with artificial intelligence, a spotlight and thermal cameras. Well, they claim their tech could be more efficient than police helicopters or video cameras around the place in deterring potential attackers. It's hoped a trial will take place at the University of Nottingham in coming months. Well, joining us is an external manager at Impact magazine at the University of Nottingham, Isabel Reichs. Isabel, thanks ever so much for joining us today. It's hard to know what to make of this story, really. I mean, it feels like one of those slightly silly season Christmas stories that is unlikely to reach fruition. Assuming that it is, there will be a great many people deeply uncomfortable about another eye in the sky, but there will be other people who say, no, what a fantastic source of reassurance. What say you?
Yeah, I think initially when I saw this, it seems kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say unrealistic, but kind of crazy, the world we live in where we have access to technology such as this. But my initial ideas about this is firstly that it's positive that it shows that funding is being put into this very important and relevant issue. As for example, at the minute, we've been doing an investigation into women's safety at our university and have found some quite shocking statistics of what is still going on. So I think firstly, it's positive that it shows that this is being taken kind of seriously and money is being put into it. And secondly, I think if it did come into fruition, as you said, I think it would act as a massive deterrent for these attacks that are still happening at the minute, whether that be harassment or assault at the minute, and also encourage more women to actually go through with the reporting process. As in our investigation, we actually found that 90% of those female students who did experience sexual assault that we spoke to didn't report it because they didn't have substantial evidence, they didn't feel comfortable. Whereas if you had a drone that could attend the scene within minutes and they could either catch a face or even prevent the assault / attack or / harassment happening at the point that it could be, then even that is a positive move in the right direction.
Isabel, I just wonder what you would say to those people who hear what you say but would point out that they would worry that it becomes the thin end of the wedge. If you have a situation where there is essentially a fleet of drones hovering over our city centres and some of our suburbs that can be called to heel at the touch of an app. OK, this is a fairly benign interpretation of that technology as we're discussing it now. But, you know, it's not such of a leap of imagination to think that some of the footage that's been obtained, some of the evidence that's been obtained, it's putting information again, potentially, we know how leaky data control can be on the internet and elsewhere, into the hands of people who actually won't use it wisely.
Yeah, I guess this was something I definitely considered when I first started looking at it, was that kind of the dangers of technology such as this, as we've seen before. But I think if you look at the benefits as well, I know that there is obviously that issue and that threat. But then again, from what I gathered from the report on it, the drones would be at a base and then they would kind of go off to the scene when alerted. So it wouldn't be like they'd be flying around kind of videoing people whenever they kind of, when someone controlled them, they would go straight to the scene that they were sent to. And I think it's also a positive in the way that they could reach places that police maybe couldn't as easily reach as quick. So where these attacks and assaults usually happen is in places where it's not broad daylight, there's not lots of lighting, it's places that people can't really get to easily. And something like this could get there very quickly and could potentially stop something horrific happening. So I think there is pros and cons to it from both sides in terms of the technology, but the pros of the technology is that because of the fact it's in the air and it can fly there and it has cameras and it has spotlights and as such, it can actually, I think it could actually be quite effective, even though obviously there would have to be a lot of kind of regulations and there would have to be someone constantly monitoring it to make sure that it didn't get into the wrong hands, because obviously sensitive information such as that, if leaked, could be very harmful.
Thanks very much indeed. Thought we'd see some pictures of drones there, but we all know what drones look like now, don't we? Now, it's time for this. It's time for my Brazier angle tonight. Let's call it the Prince Andrew Index, a way of measuring how much support drains away from the Crown every time a picture appears of the Duke of York, every time we see him at the wheel of his Range Rover, always a Range Rover, driving around Windsor. He epitomises for many, he's the very caricature of, a type of bloated, entitled, haughty, disdainful privilege that some recoil from. Each time a photograph appears in the papers or online of Prince Andrew out riding, his bovine Windsor jawline pinched by a chin strap, he undoes, say some of the good work done by William and Kate, Charles and Camilla, the Queen and her late husband. I don't mean this flippantly. I am part of the 2/3 of Britons who are happy, very happy, with the monarchy and the job that they do. Let's reflect a little bit of what this means for the royal family. We're going to do that with Colonel Richard Kemp, who is one of those who has been pondering on whether it's going to be necessary, perhaps, for Prince Andrew to undergo effectively a period of purdah. Do we have Richard Kemp, Colonel Richard Kemp? I'm not sure we do. He's not there. As we do that, let me just reflect to you that you have an opportunity to participate in our poll this evening. Is it time for Prince Andrew to surrender his HRH title and military associations? This is in the context of a story yesterday, the Sunday Times, suggesting that courtiers were looking hard at what to do about Prince Andrew, those military associations in particular, of which there are 9, suggestion that a Grenadier Guardsman was unhappy about him being Colonel-in-Chief of the Grenadier Guards, but there are other military associations as well. Let's turn to Colonel Richard Kemp for a perspective on this. Colonel, thanks for your time, appreciate it. I mean, this is in the gift of the Queen, so it's not something that lobbying by media organisations, politicians, the Twitter rabble can affect. What's your sense?
Yeah, it's certainly in the hands of the Queen, and I think it's a rather different situation to most other situations, whereby I would say, despite her obviously close connections, family connections with Prince Andrew, after all, he's her son. We can rely 100% on her to make the right decision for the country and for the armed forces when and if she decides whether he should or should not lose his military titles and his military associations. And you probably couldn't say that about any other close family connection, but I think with the Queen, her record is so strong that most of us would have complete faith in her ability to decide this and to make the right decision.
Yeah. I just wonder sometimes, Richard, whether you get a sense from what old soldiers are saying about this, because, you know, privately, gatherings, blokes down the pub, it's important to restate the point, and many of our email correspondents today have been making exactly this, that in the eyes of the law, Prince Andrew's done nothing wrong, but in the court of public opinion, there are many people, a majority, in fact, according to a YouGov survey of 3 or 4 months ago, who feel very strongly that he has no role now left in public life.
Yeah, well, he has, of course, left most of his public commitments after the TV interview when he was interviewed on this subject. But you're right, he's not been proved guilty of any offence, to my knowledge. And therefore, I think I would say that one ought to, at least until things materialise a bit better, to give him the benefit of the doubt. Of course, you know, as you kind of intimated, old soldiers and serving soldiers who I've spoken to, many have a different view, and they feel that his associations with the armed forces should be withdrawn. I think it's extremely important that members of the royal family have absolutely unimpeachable behaviour, and even if their behaviour is in question, even if it's not proven to be wrong, that is potentially problematic. Members of the armed forces, I think, look up to the royal family and have a relationship with the royal family that's very uncommon, that doesn't really exist in any other walk of life, or very few other walks of life. For example, you mentioned Prince Andrew, colonel of a number of different regiments, as are other members of the royal family. They're official connections, they're honorary appointments, they often visit their regiments, and they do need to maintain that very high level of respect that they have in most cases over the years.
We remember a different Prince Andrew, don't we? It feels like a long time ago now. It is a long time ago. What are we approaching, the 40th anniversary this year of the invasion of the Falklands Island, where he served with huge distinction. I just wonder how many military people, as well as members of the public, think back to that time when he was flying, I think, a Sea King helicopter, dangerous missions off the aircraft carriers. Should we remember that?
Well, we should, of course. That is part of the armed forces' memory and view of him, as indeed it was with Prince Harry when he went to Afghanistan and served on 2 tours in Afghanistan. And in both cases, both Prince Harry and Prince Andrew didn't need to do that. As I mentioned, their titles and their connection with the armed forces are honorary, but they both served and they both went to war, and they didn't really need to. So I think, they both gained a lot of respect as a result of that. I think Prince Harry's probably lost most of the respect he had as a result of the events that have unfolded during the course of the last year. And it may be that Prince Andrew will find himself in the same situation.
Yeah, it looks that way, doesn't it? Colonel Richard Kemp, as ever, appreciate your time. Thanks ever so much. You've still got time if you want to vote in our poll. Is it time for Prince Andrew to surrender his HRH title and those military associations? Up next, Nana standing in for Jubes & Co. But first, the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK looking largely dry in the south, some rain and hill snow further north. Let's have a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, whilst it will be largely dry, it will be rather cloudy this evening, remaining mild though, with temperatures still in double figures. The southeast of England, as well as East Anglia, will also be dry this evening, but again with a fair amount of cloud across the capital. There'll be some outbreaks of rain across Wales as we end Monday. But northern areas, they may also see some clearer spells developing as well. Well, the Midlands this evening should be largely dry, we expect, although southern areas will remain cloudy and mild. The North Midlands may see some clearer spells, but here it will be that little bit colder. Moving up to northern England, we see that band of rain and hill snow moving southwards across the area. Behind the rain, turning much colder than it has been of late. That might be a comfort to some of you. The cold air will already be across Scotland, with some blustery wintry showers across the north, giving the risk of some icy patches here. Further south, dry but quickly turning frosty, and the clearer but colder weather will also be spreading across Northern Ireland this evening, with any rain quickly clearing to the south of the country. A few showers may follow across the north coast this evening. We'll see the band of rain and hill continue to move southwards, with frequent snow showers and strong winds across the far north. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Dan Wootton, join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is